I want to say all praise Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who rule well, and all the Akim laboring in the work, pushing out this truth. Shalom to the hopeful elect. We hasten for the return of Hamashiach, Yahweh Shai, and the establishment of righteousness on earth and the destruction of this wicked kingdom. Before I get into my lesson, I want to go ahead with my disclaimer. I'm not a member of Great Millstone, but those are the brothers that I listen to and I learn from. So I always want to make sure I give them their credit and give them their just due. I also make that disclaimer just in case I go off on any scripture or go off in any way. I don't want the ministry to be blamed. Alright, so this lesson is going to be going over Daniel chapter 7. And what you're seeing here on the screen is a representation of the four beasts he described in his dream. So let's go ahead and go to Daniel chapter 7. This is Daniel chapter 7 verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Now before I go any farther, I think it's important to build a timeline with some context, because starting with the timeline will also help you understand the progression of these empires from the interpretation of these dreams and these visions and these beasts up until this time that we're in now. So first, this is after the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II. There was more than one Nebuchadnezzar, but Nebuchadnezzar II was the one that led the Israelites of the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, into the Babylonian captivity. And Daniel was one of those Israelites who were led into that captivity. Now, Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC. And after he died, his son became king of Babylon. His son was, one of his sons. This was Amel-Marduk. But Amel-Marduk only reigned for a few years because Belshazzar and his father Nabonidus, they plotted against him and had him killed. And Belshazzar's father Nabonidus is the one who actually became king of Babylon. And he was the last king. So Nabonidus was king of Babylon from 556 BC to 539 BC. 539 BC being the time when the Babylonian Empire fell. So there was a period of time during the reign of Nabonidus, king of Babylon. He was in exile, and he was pretty much in a self-imposed exile. I think he was having some disputes with some of the nobles, but either way, he was in exile, and he had his son Belshazzar pretty much have control over the kingdom, but Nabonidus was still the actual king. So this is the time frame that we're in right now when Daniel is having his dream. So let's read this again. This is Daniel chapter 1. Salaki, this is Daniel chapter 7 verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Verse 2. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. Now those four winds are four empires or four kingdoms that Daniel is getting ready to describe using the likeness of different beasts, the same beast that we seen in the intro. Now that great sea is the Mediterranean Sea, and it is the land around that great sea that these four empires would spring up from. Now, you've had other empires throughout the world, but what was so significant about these four empires around that great sea? Well, the land of Israel bordered that great sea, and it was these four kingdoms through the course of history that had the biggest impact on Israel. whether it was wars, whether it was us being taken into captivity, or whether it was us taking on the customs and ways of these other nations. So let's read that again. This is Daniel chapter 7 verse 2. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. Now, I want to go to Zechariah chapter 1, but after that, I want to get some maps and show you exactly what's being described. So again, those four winds are those same four kingdoms. That great sea is the Mediterranean Sea. So this is Zechariah chapter 1, and we're going to read verse 18. And it reads, Then lifted I up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, four horns. These four horns are those same four winds, and those four winds are those same four beasts, which represent four kingdoms. Horns represent power and authority. So verse 18 again. Then lifted I up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, four horns. And I said unto the angel that talked with me, What be these? And he answered me, These are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. So that's the significance of those four nations. Now, of course, they were greatly influential as far as the world goes, but the most important thing is that they had a direct impact on Israel. Again, whether it was different wars, whether it was going into different types of captivities, taking on their customs, taking on the ways of the heathen. That was the significance that these four kingdoms played. And ultimately, what do we know? According to Romans chapter 9, the scripture said unto Pharaoh that for this same purpose I have raised thee up, that my name might be declared. What does Daniel chapter 4 verse 17 tell us? That the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. So ultimately, the greatness of these empires was all through the will of the Most High. But let's read 19 again and then read the rest of the verses. So 19. And I said unto the angel that talked with me, What be these? And he answered me, These are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. And Yahweh showed me four carpenters. Then said I, What come these to do? And he spake, saying, These are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man did lift up his head. But these are come to fray them, to cast out the horns of the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah, to scatter it. So again, these are the nations that the Most High used to punish us in various ways. Again, captivity, and ultimately that last beast scattering us through the four corners of the earth. But anyway, before I get to the map, I do want to go to Numbers chapter 34, and I'll start at verse 1. It's going to drive that same point, or it's going to tie in with this map I'm going to get next. So this is Numbers chapter 34 verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye come into the land of Canaan, because it's the land of Canaan, it's really pronounced Canaan, but I do have a habit of saying Canaan, as most people do. But anyway, the Most High gave us the land of Canaan. So the Most High is saying, when you come into the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall unto you for an inheritance, even the land of Canaan with the coast thereof. So the Most High is getting ready to describe the borders of the land. Verse 3. Then your south quarter shall be from the wilderness of Zin along by the coast of Edom. And the map is going to show you Zin and the coast of Edom. And your south border shall be the outmost coast of the salt sea eastward. Verse 4. And your border shall turn from the south to the ascent of Aqrabam or Aqrabim, and pass on to Zin. And going forth therefore shall be from the south to Kadesh Barnea, and shall go on to Hazaradar, and pass on to Asman. Verse 5, and the border shall fetch a compass from Asman unto the river of Egypt, which is the Nile, and the goings out of it shall be at the sea. Now when we get this map, we're going to see exactly what the Most High described. Alright, so let's go to the maps. Now this first picture, it's not really a map, it's more of an aerial view of the land, but I thought it would be good to include because it gives you a different perspective of the beautiful land that the Most High gave us, you know, without having the lines and the different city names. And obviously it's not an ancient map, but again, just a different perspective. But this is the whole land, and that big land, or not land, but that big body of water will be the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Great Sea. So let's get some other maps. First, let's start with this one because this directly correlates with Numbers chapter 34. And this is the border that the Most High was setting for the land of Israel. And you can see the different names that were mentioned. You can't see my cursor, so it's really no need for me to try to hover over the names. But you see the wilderness of Zin. You see Edom. You see the Salt Sea. You see Kadesh Barnea. You see the river of Egypt, which is the Nile. And this land, this whole land, is the land of Canaan. And again, that body of water to your left is the Mediterranean Sea. Now these four kingdoms are represented by beasts. The first beast representing Babylon. The second beast representing the Medo-Persian Empire. The third beast representing the Greek Empire. And the fourth beast representing the Roman Empire. So let's start with the Babylonian Empire as far as these maps go. So this is the Babylonian Empire. And I'm not going to get deep into these maps. I'm really just trying to show you the empire and its sphere of control. Also show you how it relates to the Mediterranean Sea and the land of Israel. Now the land of Israel is not listed here. It does say Jerusalem. But you see that on the previous map, our coast bordered the Mediterranean Sea. Again, I'm not getting deep into this. I'm just trying to show you the sphere of control. All right, so the next empire would have been the Medo-Persian Empire. Now this is I chose this map again because I didn't want too much information jumping out at you when you see the different lines and the different cities or whatever. But again, it's just showing you the sphere of control. You know where it was located, the general area, also where it relates to the Mediterranean Sea and Israel, the land of Israel. So the next empire, and I'm gonna come back to these maps, would have been the Greek Empire. And let's get this one. Again, showing you that sphere of control and just how far out, the Greek Empire was able to advance. Now I'm going to get another map that was similar to the one we just saw going over the Greek Empire. Pretty much showing the same thing. And I just like the layout of it. So, ain't nothing too deep about it. And the next empire is the Roman Empire. Now I do have a few of these Roman empires. So let's start with this one first. And this is pretty much at the height of the Roman Empire. And you can see that white in the middle, that's that Mediterranean Sea. Now, I just think it's very interesting that, the Most High made sure to specify the Mediterranean Sea, because as we read, or when we read in Revelations, when it tells you the sea is the people, this is symbolic of the control that the Roman Empire would eventually have, which it has today. It controls everything. So you see those other empires weren't able to span control to the extent where it could encompass that sea. Not even the Greek Empire, but the Romans were able to do that. And I just think it's a spiritual eye catch. So for lack of better words, it's just a spiritual thing that took place, because a lot of things happen and they have a spiritual context later on in history, you know. But it's just something that caught my eye when comparing, you know, the extent of influence between these other nations or these other empires. And let's get another one. This is one like the other ones, without the lines, without the city names. Again, just showing you that span of power that they had. I got one more map I want to pull up regarding the Roman Empire. Let me zoom in a little bit. It's the same thing. I didn't really like the map, but it has some information on this map that I'm going to, you know, relate later, you know, regarding the 10 horns. And those 10 horns are some of these what's called vassal states, like the Burgundians, the Lombards, the Ostrogoths. You know, these nations, you know, these states, they were pretty much under Roman control. But these are those 10 horns. But we'll get into that. But this is the reason I showed this map. Now there's one more or two more maps I want to show to drive a different point home. Well, not really drive a different point home, but just to make mention. This area of land that the Most High gave us, it was part of what's called the Fertile Crescent. It was a beautiful land. It was very fertile. That's why the Most High likened it to a land of milk and honey. It wasn't that, you know, you had milk gushing out of the ground and honey just oozing out of trees everywhere. It represented the beauty and prosperity of that land. So it's a lot of things to take into consideration. You know, the nations that rose up in that area. You know, Israel being pretty much right in the middle of it. Because you had the Babylonian Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire rising up from our east, from Israel's east, and then you had the Greeks and the Romans rising up from the west, and then, you know, in the end encompassing us. So I got one more map. It ain't no deep map, you know. It just gives you just a different perspective. All right, so you see the map. So back in Daniel, let's scroll down. So we'll start at verse 2. So this is Daniel chapter 7, verse 2. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. So we know that those four winds represent those four different kingdoms, and that great sea is talking about the Mediterranean Sea. So it's describing these four nations that rose up in that area. Verse 3. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Also, it's important to point out that this is how the scriptures speak. They speak in parables, because obviously those beasts didn't come up out of the sea. Verse 4. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. And I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, what does this represent? The short answer is the Babylonian Empire, but it actually is a little deeper than just the Babylonian Empire, because it's representing both the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire. But it's describing a transition of regional influence and regional power from the Assyrians to the Babylonians. That's one part of it. So we all know that, or we should know that, the lion with eagle's wings is synonymous with the Assyrian Empire. So I have a quick picture just to show that point, and I think this is called a Lamesu, but this is one of the deities of the Assyrians. You know, a lion with eagle's wings and a man's head. Now let's get a little edification on the Babylonian Empire and the Assyrian Empire. So the Neo-Babylonian Empire, also known as the Second Babylonian Empire, and historically known as the Chaldean Empire, was the last of the Mesopotamian empires to be ruled by monarchs native to the Mesopotamia, beginning with Nabopolassar's coronation as king of Babylon in 626 BC. Now, Nabopolassar was Nebuchadnezzar II's father. Alright, so beginning with Nabopolassar's coronation as king of Babylon in 626 BC and being firmly established through the fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in 612 BC, the Neo-Babylonian Empire and its ruling Chaldean dynasty were short-lived, conquered after less than a century by the Persian Achaemenid Empire in 539 BC. Okay, so just a little edification on that. So again, this lion with wings, that part of it represents the Assyrian Empire. But again, it's a transition of regional power or influence in that area. But it also goes on to state, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings, and I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given unto it. This is really going into the power of the Most High, because even though the influence and empire and power was described as a lion, because a lion is a ferocious animal, and it having wings, that means it reaches great heights, because the eagle can fly high and it can fly far. But the Most High put bounds on it, so to speak. At the end of the day, no matter how great these kingdoms are, and no matter how ferocious or tyrannical their leaders are, at the end of the day, they're still men. The Most High is still in control of all of that. So that's what that's representing. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So basically, you still a man. Now, I do want to get some scriptures to drive that point home. Now, these aren't necessary precepts for this, but it drives the point home. Also, it'll tie in later on in the lesson. So first, I want to go ahead and get Ezekiel chapter 28 verse 2, and it reads, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, thus saith the Lord power, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man. You just a man and not a God. Though thou set thine heart as the heart of the Most High. Now, with some understanding, this is speaking about, Tyrus in the ancient times, but the scriptures they're twofold, they're threefold. There's a depth to the scriptures. But this scripture right here is referring to Esau, Edom in these times right now. So this is applying to Esau, Edom, because he thinks he's God. He has the God complex. But I just wanted to show this verse to illustrate exactly what I was saying about, the man having to stand up on his feet and giving the heart of a man, because at the end of the day, the Most High is in control of all this. Now let's go to Daniel chapter 4, because I quoted this earlier, but I just want to go ahead and get it. This is Daniel chapter 4 verse 17, and this is for all nations, this is for all kingdoms. It reads, this matter is by the decree of the watchers and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basis of men. So this is the illustration that's being described here with the transitioning of the Assyrian Empire to the Babylonian Empire and the representation of a man, just showing that it's the Most High that's in control of all of this. You know, no matter how powerful these nations are, no matter how mighty they get, they still men. So, short answer, this is representing the Babylonian Empire. But again, we got a little bit more understanding on it. Verse 5. And I beheld another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. Now this second beast, which was likened unto a bear, represents the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, before I actually get into the Medo-Persian Empire, I want to point out something. So this is obviously the transition from one kingdom or one empire, that being the Babylonian Empire, to the next empire, that being the Medo-Persian Empire. And this is during the time of Belshazzar. Because remember, the kingdom of Babylon, it fell in 539 BC. Belshazzar was the acting king in the stead of the actual king, his father Nabonidus, during this time. But the point I want to get is in Daniel chapter 5. So let's go to Daniel chapter 5. And the point is in the last 2 verses, but I want to start at verse 18. So this is Daniel chapter 5, verse 18. And it reads, O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. So this is Daniel. He's speaking to Belshazzar. Now he's saying that the Most High gave his father Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't his actual father. It was Nabonidus. And actually Nabonidus was married into the family, but that's neither here nor there, or that important. But the point being, one, the Most High gave that kingdom to him. But let's keep reading. And for the majesty, Salaki, let me backtrack. So what's going on here? Belshazzar is having a party, and he's drinking and eating with the vessels of the temple, the holy vessels, the holy, like silverware, plates, cups of the temple, and basically blaspheming against God, the Most High, through his actions. And a hand appeared out of thin air and wrote a message on the wall. That message was Mene Mene Tekel Upharsin. And Daniel is getting ready to explain what that handwriting meant, because none of Belshazzar's wise men, none of his counselors, nobody could discern or interpret what the writing meant. But the Most High put the spirit on Daniel to do so. So that's the backstory. So this is verse 18 again, and it reads, O thou king, the Most High gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would slew, Salakia, whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. Basically, he had complete control to do whatever he wanted to do. He killed those who he didn't like. He set up those he did like. Verse 20. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Because one of the things the Most High really hates is pride. He hates pride. And there hasn't been a nation as proud as the nation that we're in right now. And we're going to get into it. But part of the reason I wanted to go into Daniel chapter 7, it was on my mind. But I knew at the end it goes into prophecy. It goes into the times we're living in. It goes into this final kingdom being destroyed, which I always like to mention. So you got some history and you got some prophecy. But anyway, verse 21. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast. And if you know the story of Nebuchadnezzar, he was so lifted up in pride, the Most High made him act like a beast. His fingernails grew real long like a wild animal. He was in the field, eating grass just like a wild animal, getting hairy just like a wild animal. That's the power of the Most High. Anyway, and he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High power ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth it over it whomsoever he will. Verse 22. And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and brass and iron, wood and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the Most High, whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. You've been set up in this great splendid way, but you're not giving the glory to the one who deserves the glory. Verse 24. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene tekel upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, the Most High hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. So it's a done deal. He already set the bounds thereof. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances, and are found wanting. So you're lacking. You're unequal. You're unbalanced. You didn't make it. Peres, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Verse 29. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So they set Daniel up. They made this proclamation that he's going to be the third in control in the kingdom. He's going to be the third ruler in the kingdom, because he was able to interpret this message that none of the wise men could interpret. But that's not the point. Verse 30. In that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, I was going to hit that in the beginning, but I wanted to save it until we got to that second beast. This is how the Babylonian Empire fell. It wasn't no great war. There was some skirmishes, but it wasn't no great war that describes. There wasn't no great war that explains the destruction that the Most High explains is going to happen to Babylon in these end times. This is a point that we keep trying to iterate. These scriptures are twofold. They speak of ancient times, but there's a spiritual connotation for the times that we're living in right now. And again, that the Babylonian kingdom fell. It fell to the Medo-Persian Empire, specifically at this time Darius the Mede. And again, the Babylonian Empire fell in 539 BC. So that was the end. That was it. Now, let's go back to Daniel chapter 7. Let's read that verse again, and then we'll get a little bit more edification, some secular edification. So this is verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. So this second empire, this second beast, is the Medo-Persian Empire, and it was raised up on itself because one side was higher than the other, which represents the the Persian Empire, the Persian part of the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medes, they had control first, but they were in league with the Persians, and the Persians end up being greater, and that's why it raised up on its side. Now I'm gonna get a little bit more on that, but before I do so, I want to get some edification on the fall of Babylon. So the fall of Babylon. The fall of Babylon denotes the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire after it was conquered by the Achaemenid Empire in 539 BCE. Historians also use the term liberation of Babylonia interchangeably. What does that mean? It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't a takeover like they just ran in and ransacked everything. It was just absorbed into their empire. Nabonidus, son of the Assyrian priestess Atagupi, came to the throne in 556 BCE after overthrowing the young king Labashi Marduk. For long periods, he entrusted rule to his son, prince and co-regent Belshazzar. So this is that same Belshazzar, who was a capable soldier but a poor politician. All of this left him somewhat unpopular with many of his subjects, particularly the priesthood and the military class. To the east, the Achaemenid Empire had been growing in strength. In October 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great entered Babylonia in peace without being engaged in battle. Babylonia was thereafter incorporated into the Persian Achaemenid realm as a satrapy. As Cyrus vowed in his cylinder to respect the people of Babylon, and since he liberated the incarcerated Jews to be returned to their homeland, he was viewed as the legitimate successor of the ancient Babylonian kings and became popular in Babylon itself, in contrast to Nabonidus. Now, this is in stark contrast from what's described in Jeremiah 50, which we about to get right now. So this is Jeremiah chapter 50, and we're going to start at verse 8. So this is Jeremiah 50 verse 8, and it reads, "Remove out of the midst of Babylon, and go forth out of the land of the Chaldeans, and be as the he-goats before the flocks." So when it's saying remove out of the midst, this is twofold, Well, this is spiritual. Let me say it that way. The Most High is using Babylon as an example of what we should be doing now. We should be spiritually departing from Babylon, spiritually departing from the ways of this place. "For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country." Now, when we looked at some of those maps, you could see that, the Medes specifically would have been coming from the north of Babylon. But in these times that we're living in now, those Medes represent the land of Russia, represent those Russians. "For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations, an assembly from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence shall she be taken. Their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert. None shall return in vain." Now, Babylon wasn't destroyed in some great war. The kingdom was given, or was transferred over to the Medes when Belshazzar was taken out. He was taken out in one night. Mene Tekel Upharsin. That same night, that very night, he was killed, and the kingdom was translated over to the Medo-Persians. We read it. Verse 10, "And Chaldea shall be a spoil. All that spoil her shall be satisfied, said Yahweh, because ye were glad Because ye rejoice. See, Babylon, this is Babylon the Great is America. America is spiritual Babylon, but Babylon the Great specifically refers to America. And this place is proud. And they rejoiced. They rejoiced over us. And I told you, one of the main things the Most High hates is, well, let me not say I told you. The scriptures tell you one of the things the Most High hates the most is pride. Pride in wickedness, pride in rebellion, pride in transgressing the laws, and pride in taking his people, the apple of his eye, you Jakes, you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, for a spoil. And the way they've treated us, they forwarded the affliction, as the scriptures tell us. Verse 11 again, because ye were glad, because ye rejoice, O ye destroyers of mine heritage. Because ye are grown fat as the heifers at grass and bellow as bulls. And they destroyed us. They destroyed us mentally. They destroyed us spiritually. They destroyed us physically. All the while, they've grown fat off of us. You know, they grow fat off of pushing us out in the entertainment business. Because everybody knows Jake has the salt of the earth. You know, not to mention slavery. Not to mention what they did to, Gad and the other northern tribes by just straight taking the land from them, slaughtering them. Verse 12, your mother shall be sore confounded. And this is speaking about, England, Great Britain. This is the mother of America. She that bare you shall be ashamed. Behold, the hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. Babylon, as we saw on the maps, is not the hindermost of the nations. The hindermost means the furthest away. That's this land over here that we're living in. See, the Most High uses Babylon, because we went into captivity in physical Babylon, and then we went into captivity in spiritual Babylon, spiritual Egypt, spiritual Assyria, which is all this place. He uses things that happen, those things that happened in the past, they happened for a reason, because they were going to correlate to prophecies in the future in the time that we're living in. But verse 11 again, verse 12 again. Your mother shall be sore confounded. She that bare you shall be ashamed. Behold, the hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness. Look, a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. That's desolation. Verse 13, because of the wrath of Yahweh, it shall not be inhabited, but it shall wholly be desolate. Everyone that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished and hiss at all her plagues. Verse 14, put yourselves in array against Babylon round about, all ye that bend the bow. All ye that bend the bow. Shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she has sinned against Yahweh. And those arrows are talking about these intercontinental ballistic missiles, these nukes. So the Most High uses Babylon. It uses Babylon because this was written in those ancient times. But it was speaking about a future prophecy. It's speaking about this time here. I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out. Now, dealing with the second beast. Again, this is representing the Medo-Persian Empire. And when it states that it raised up itself on one side, this is representing one portion of the empire being greater than the other. That portion being the Persians, because initially it was the Medes that were the dominant power. And eventually it was the Persians that began to gain control over the whole region. So the Medes, the Medo-Persian Empire, pretty much ruled from around 539 BC, which was the fall of the Babylonian Empire, up until 331 BC, which was the beginning of the Greek Empire. Now, it states that it had 3 ribs in its mouth. Those ribs represent the directions in which the Medo Empire extended its conquer, that being to the west, being to the south, and being to the north. And those regions, those directional regions, were represented by Babylon being conquered, which would have been to the west, and Egypt being conquered, which would have been to the south, and Lydia being conquered, which would have been to the north. So what I want to do next is get a map, and then we'll get a little bit more edification as far as history, and then we'll get some scripture to tie this all in. All right, so first, this is the map showing the Media and Persia, and you can see that it conquered Babylonia, which would have been pretty much westward, directly westward. Also, you see Egypt, which would have been south, and then you see Lydia, which would have been north. Now, one thing I do want to point out, next to Persia, you see the word Carmenia. Carmenians are Persians, and I'm going to make a point with that once we get into the scriptures. But again, I just wanted to show the map, to show the span of control. Same concept, you know, it's these nations volleying for power and control in this area around the Mediterranean Sea. Again, all of this has a direct influence, or has had a direct influence through the course of history, over Israel, over Jerusalem. All right, so let's get a little history. Now, this is from the website, a Jehovah's Witness website. I read a few other websites, a few different articles, but this one had the information in the way that I wanted to read it. So we'll just go with this one. And it's just a little edification, a little history. We'll scroll down. The ruins of palaces and royal tombs provide only a glimpse of the grandeur, power, and wealth of the ancient dual empire of Media and Persia. Before the two kingdoms united, Media was the dominant kingdom. But in 550 BCE, the Medes came under the control of Persian king Cyrus II, who thereafter ruled over the kingdom of Medo-Persia. Centered in the region north of the Persian Gulf, this vast realm eventually stretched from the Aegean Sea to Egypt to northwestern India and included Judea. Medo-Persia ruled over the Jewish nation for more than 200 years. From the overthrow of Babylon in 539 BCE until Medo-Persia itself was defeated by the Greeks in 331 BCE. Numerous Bible books comment on significant events that occurred during this time. All right. Trustworthy history, and this is just showing how history, coincides with what was written in the scriptures. The Bible tells us that King Cyrus II freed the Jews held captive in Babylon, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the Most High's temple, which the Babylonians had destroyed in 607 BCE. Now, I want to make a quick point. Let's go back to the scriptures. When you read a verse like we read in the beginning, Zechariah chapter 1 verse 18, it says, "Then lifted up mine eyes and saw, behold, 4 horns." So now we have a better understanding of what those 4 horns represent. Again, I told you the short answer, the first beast, these horns represent those same beasts. The short answer for the first beast will be the Babylonian Empire, but it's actually the Assyrian and the Babylonian Empire, now that we have a little bit more understanding. So the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian and the Babylonian Empire being the first beast. The second beast was the Medo-Persian Empire. And again, let's read this. Let's read verse 19. "And I said unto the angel that talked with me, What be these? And he answered me, These are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem." It's let me just say it. It's good to have an understanding of what this scripture is talking about, because the Medo-Persians, they ruled over Jerusalem, but they didn't lead the Israelites into captivity like the Assyrians did with the northern kingdom in 722 BCE, and like the Babylonians did with the southern kingdom in 586 BCE. But what happened, The Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, they allowed the Israelites that was held captive. They were captive exiles. They allowed them to go back. Now, this is the point I want to make. Even with those two captivities, the Assyrian and the Babylonian captivity, it's not like every single Israelite was uprooted and moved into those captivities. Now, focusing more so on the Babylonian captivity, when the Babylonians took the southern kingdom captive, they didn't take every single Israelite. Same thing with the northern kingdom, but I just want to focus on the southern kingdom because this is spoken about in the scriptures. They didn't take every single Israelite. They mainly took the nobles, and left the poor for the most part. Now, when Cyrus gave the decree to allow the Israelites to go back home and rebuild, every single Israelite didn't just uproot and leave and then go back to the kingdom. So that was a further scattering, not necessarily in a negative sense, but it further, exasperated the scattering of Israel as a whole. And that was kind of the precursor, right before the Greek Empire, going into the controversy in the New Testament with there's neither Greek nor Jew. Because you had these Israelites who stayed behind, who didn't want to go back. Either, some of them may have been old. Some of them were just comfortable, and some of them really didn't want to go back and rebuild. They didn't want to physically rebuild. They didn't want to work. So over the course of time, they're just comfortable staying in Babylon and furthering taking on their customs, furthering their disassociation with the heritage of Israel. So that's how this is how this verse explains, the scattering of Judah, Jerusalem, and Israel with these four kingdoms. And I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out. So let's read this again, and then we'll go back to the little article. And I said unto the angel that talked with me, what be these? And he answered me, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. So again, I just wanted to make that point. So going back to the article, the Bible tells us that King Cyrus II freed the Jews held captive in Babylon, allowing them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the Most High's temple, which the Babylonians had destroyed in 607 BCE. And with these time frames, you can always find some article or some history, given a different time frame, saying this is actually when it happened. But for the most part, 586 is the general agreed upon date for the destruction of the temple. Anyway, corroborating this account is a clay document known as the Cyrus Cylinder, discovered in 1879 in the ruins of ancient Babylon. The inscriptions identify Cyrus by name and describes his policy by returning previously captured peoples and their religious objects to their native lands. See, one of the things that Cyrus was doing, he wasn't really raising hell on the people. He was allowing them to go back to their lands. He was allowing them to keep their customs and their religions, because it was in his best interest. Instead of having all this conquered land and it being desolate and destroyed, it was in his best interest to have these people go back to their native lands, rebuild it, so he could tax them, rebuild their land so they can flourish, and he could tax them, and the kingdom as a whole would flourish and be wealthy. So that was the mindset of Cyrus, which was, a righteous and wise, thought. Anyway, the inscription identifies Cyrus by name and describes his policy of returning previously captured peoples and their religious objects to their native lands. The Bible writer Isaiah recorded Yahweh's prophetic words concerning Cyrus. All that I delight in, he will completely carry out. And we're going to get that. And, I wanted to make sure I read this little excerpt right here, because the scriptures are not a fairy tale. The scriptures prophesy everything that was going to happen. And secular history just confirms it. You know, well, we don't necessarily need secular history to validate our faith. Our faith is through the spirit of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shah. But this is just further proof. You know, all that I delight in, he will completely carry out. Even in my saying of Jerusalem, she will be rebuilt. And of the temple, you will have your foundation laid. And that's in Isaiah 44 and 28. And again, we're going to get a few more scriptures. In fact, Cyrus ordered that funds for the temple reconstruction be given from the king's house, says Ezra 6:3-4. This amazing statement harmonizes with secular history. It was a consistent policy of Persian kings to help restore sanctuaries in their empire, says the book Persia and the Bible. The Bible tells us that oppressors of the Jews later wrote to Darius the Great, also called Darius the First, challenging the Jews' claim that Cyrus had authorized the reconstruction of the temple. So, you know, and Ezra goes into this. So you had these other individuals pretty much trying to stop the rebuilding of the temple, trying to halt it because they couldn't be a part of it. So, you know, they tried to oppose that the Israelites had the right to do this. But, you know, Darius, he wouldn't got, well, we'll read it. He's going to mention it. Let me just let them mention it. So let me start back at the top. The Bible tells us that oppressors of the Jews later wrote to Darius the Great, challenging the Jews' claim that Cyrus had authorized the reconstruction of the temple. Darius commanded that a search be made for the original written decree. And this is also in the scriptures. The outcome, a scroll containing Cyrus' decree, was found at Ecbatana, the capital. In response, Darius wrote, I, Darius, do put through an order. Let it be done promptly. Opposition to the work then ceased. And again, this is in Ezra. All right. Secular history supports these details. For one thing, Ecbatana was the summer residence of Cyrus, and he may have issued his decree from there. Also, archaeological discoveries show that Medo-Persian kings took a keen interest in religious matters affecting their realm and wrote letters to resolve disputes. All right, let's go. I'm not going to read everything, but it's a little bit more here I want to get. In a divinely inspired dream, the prophet Daniel saw a series of 4 beasts rising out of the sea, each representing a successive world power. The first beast, a winged lion, represented Babylon. The second was like a bear. The account continues. This is what they were saying to it. Get up, eat much flesh. The fearsome bear pictured Medo-Persia. True to Daniel's prophecy, Medo-Persia displayed a voracious appetite for conquest. Not long after Daniel's vision, Cyrus defeated the Medes and then waged war against neighboring Lydia and Babylon. His sons Cambyses II conquered Egypt. Later, Medo-Persian rulers expanded the empire even further. How can we be sure of this interpretation? In a separate but related vision, Daniel saw a ram making thrusts to the west and to the north and to the south. Now that ram is spoken about in Daniel 8, and we'll get that when we get to the third beast. The prophecy was fulfilled when Medo-Persia made thrusts against other nations, including mighty Babylon. And an angel of the Most High interpreted this vision, saying to Daniel, the ram you saw possessing the 2 horns stands for the kings of Media and Persia. Again, so just a little edification as far as history goes. Now let's go to the scriptures. All right, so first we'll start with the actual prophecy of the Most High putting the spirit on Cyrus to give the decree for Israel to be able to go back to the land and rebuild the temple. Now the point is in the last verse, but I do want to read the first 5 verses because this is, again, there's a depth to the scriptures, this is spiritually talking about us in this time, but it's still going to speak about the prophecy of Cyrus. So this is Isaiah chapter 44, and we'll start at verse 1. Yet now, hear, O Jacob my servant, and Israel whom I have chosen. Thus saith Yahweh that made thee, and formed thee from the womb, which will help thee. Fear not, O Jacob, my servant, and thou, Jeshurun, whom I have chosen. And this is speaking about us in this time. You know, it was speaking to them in their time as well, but it's speaking to us in this time. For I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thine offspring. This is going into Ezekiel chapter 37, the valley of dry bones. You know, that spiritual water being poured on us, because we were dead mentally, we were dead spiritually. Now we have the breath of life in us. Verse 4, and they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the water courses. One shall say, I am Yahweh's. And this is what we're doing now. You know, the Most High has poured his spirit on us to turn us back to our heritage, turn us back to the law, statutes, and commandments, and tell these nations and you other Jakes that we're the people, we're the children of the Most High. You know, we're the Israelites. One shall say, I am Yahweh's, and another shall call himself by the name of Jacob, and another shall subscribe with his hand unto Yahweh, and surname himself by the name of Israel. And this is what we're doing. We're coming back to the heritage, our heritage. We're calling ourselves by Hebrew names. You know, this is all a part of the Most High pouring that water upon us that were thirsty. And we were so thirsty, we were bone dry. Again, that's going into Ezekiel chapter 37. But I wanted to start out with that verse, with those few verses, before jumping down, because the whole context of this chapter is, you know, the Most High, you know, coming to redeem or deliver the people, deliver the Israelites out of, you know, out of their captivity from Babylon through the hand of Cyrus. So I'll just read verse, let me start at verse 23. Sing, O ye heavens, for Yahweh hath done it. Shout, ye lower parts of the earth. Break forth into singing, ye mountains, O forests, and every tree therein. For Yahweh hath redeemed Jacob and glorified himself in Israel. And again, this is twofold, because the Redeemer is Yahweh Shai, and Yahweh is going to glorify himself by saving his elect. Thus saith Yahweh thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb. I am Yahweh that maketh all things, and stretcheth forth the heavens alone, that spreadeth abroad the earth by myself, that frustrateth the tokens of the liars, and maketh diviners mad, that turneth wise men backward, and maketh their tongue foolish, that confirmeth the word of his servant. What does that mean? That means when the Most High puts his spirit on us to prophesy these words, and the Most High confirms these words by making these things happen. And performeth the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, thou shalt be inhabited. And this is what we're saying. This is why these scriptures are twofold. The land is going to be inhabited by Israel, you know, the true descendants, you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. You know, we are going to inherit the kingdom of heaven, which is going to be a government on this earth. Thou shalt be inhabited, and the cities of Judah ye shall be built, and I will raise up the decayed places thereof. Now again, it did happen. You know, the Most High did allow the captive exiles from the southern kingdom to return to the land and rebuild it, but it wasn't the rebuilding of the whole nation. You gotta understand this point. When the southern kingdom, which was the kingdom of Judah, was taken captive, that was a kingdom. You know, that was a whole nation. The kingdom of Judah was destroyed. So when these Israelites were allowed to go back to the land, they went back to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple. It wasn't a kingdom of Judah again. But again, just for some edification, or just for some food for thought. That saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure. Even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. Now you can do the research on this. This prophecy was about 100 years before this even happened. Now let's go to the next chapter right quick and just get the first verse, because it continues. Thus saith Yahweh to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two levied gates, and the gates shall not be shut. So point being, it was prophesied that, Cyrus was going to it was prophesied that the Most High was going to use Cyrus to rise up in power and have great authority over the other kingdoms, to eventually allow Israel to go back into the land and rebuild the temple. But again, it is twofold. That the beginning of that chapter is speaking about us now, But anyway, let's go to 2 Chronicles 36 and 22. So what we read in Isaiah chapter 44 and 45 was the prophecy of that. So this is before that happened. Now in 2 Chronicles, this is the account of it happening. So let's jump down to verse 22, and it reads, Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Yahweh spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it into writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth hath Yahweh, power of heaven, given me, and he hath charged me to build him an house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of his people? Yahweh is Salakia. Yahweh, his power be with you. Let him go. So Cyrus made the decree, saying the Most High put the spirit on him to let anybody who was a Israelite, anybody who's from the southern kingdom of Judah, if you're one of the Most High's children, go back to your land and rebuild the temple. Now I want to point out something in verse 22. The Most High said, let me just read it. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Yahweh spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished. So what did Jeremiah say? So Jeremiah had to prophesy something that had to be accomplished. Let's go find out. So this is Jeremiah. This is Jeremiah chapter 25, and we're going to start at verse 11. And it reads, And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. This is going into the southern kingdom being taken into captivity and having to serve that captivity in Babylon for about 70 years. And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon. So the Most High uses these nations to punish us. And then after he's done punishing us, he punishes them, because we're still the Most High's people. He just wants to correct us. And he's a man of his word, And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith Yahweh, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolation. Now that land was not a perpetual desolation. It was just absorbed into the Medo-Persian Empire. But as we read in 2 Chronicles, the Most High said that all his words were going to be accomplished. So some of that was accomplished in ancient times. The rest of it is going to be accomplished in these times. the total desolation, the perpetual desolation, is going to be accomplished in these times, because America is Babylon the Great. America is the daughter of Babylon. America is spiritual Babylon. So verse 13, and I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it. See, this is the power of the Most High. What did he say? I'm going to bring against it all my words. So that means everything that the Most High said was going to happen is going to happen. Some of it happened then because it applied to those ancient times, but it was a symbolic representation of what was ultimately to be experienced here. So the captivity is the same thing we're going on now, or experiencing now. The wickedness, the sorcery, the witchcraft, just taking on the ways and the customs of the heathen, all that's taking place here now. So it's the same thing. But the destruction that was prophesied against that ancient place is the destruction that's preserved for this place that we're living in currently. And I will bring upon that land all my words which I have pronounced against it, even all that is written in this book. So you remember what we read in Jeremiah chapter 50. All ye that bend the bow, shoot at her. They didn't do that then. So this is in store for now. Even all that is written in this book, which Jeremiah hath prophesied against all the nations. All right, so I wanted to get that account. Now let's go to 2nd Ezra's Salakia. Let's go to Ezra chapter 6 and get the account of Darius the king making that same decree, and then we'll find out why he made that decree. So this is Ezra chapter 6 verse 1. Then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasures were laid up in Babylon, and there was found at Achmathah, and this is the same place that was mentioned in this little article, Akbatana. It's the same place. And there was found at Achmathah in the palace that is in the province of the Medes a roll, and therein was a record thus written. All right, so I'll wait to get the little backstory. So verse 3, and I'm gonna stop it at verse 3. It's going into what was written on the scroll or the roll, and it was the original decree made by Cyrus. And this is the decree, the same thing we read in 2nd Chronicles. In the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of the Most High at Jerusalem. Let the house be builded, the place where they offer sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, and the height thereof 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 60 cubits. And he goes into, the description of how he wants the temple to be made, and it was all through the Spirit. But anyway, so Darius had to make a decree after the fact, and let's go to not second Ezra. I'm so used to going to the Apocrypha, but anyway, this is Ezra chapter 4, and we'll find out why Darius had to make that decree. So this is Ezra chapter 4 verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto Yahweh, power of Israel, so under the original decree by Cyrus, the Israelites were moving forward with building the temple. And then you had these adversaries. So let's find out why they were adversaries. Verse 2. Then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers, and said unto them, Let us build with you, for we seek your power, as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, or Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, Ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our power, but we ourselves together will build unto Yahweh power of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, had commanded us. Then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. So pretty much they were always coming up against them. Actually, let me get verse 5. And hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now, it's a lot in there to digest. First and foremost, in these current times, we're building that spiritual temple. This is a spiritual temple that's being built. But just like the ancient times, it's not for other nations. These other nations can't be a part of it. Salvation is only for the Israelites. The Most High is only dealing with the Israelites. These other nations can't be a part of it. And these elites know that, specifically Esau, Edom. So they trouble us. They trouble us with all their counsels, their hired counsels, their think tanks. To do what? To trouble us how? Trouble us by demonizing us in the media, trying to suppress our videos, trying to suppress the truth, trying to suppress us as a whole, mentally, by all the crap that you see on the TV, through the media, and that you hear on the radio, polluting the mind or distracting the mind. Also the body, with the water, the food, the air, also spiritually troubling us by telling you the laws are done away with, so you can take part in all of the abominations that the Most High hates and keep you separated from them. So, nothing is, the scriptures tell us the things that are written aforetime are written for your learning and understanding. These counselors, they're still here. They're in the form of these different think tanks and these scientists. They still have a wicked priesthood, just like ancient Babylon with the Chaldeans. But I just wanted to, point out a little bit of how history ties in with prophecy and what was written in the scriptures. Now, I want to touch on two more things dealing with the Medo-Persian Empire. Then we'll move on to the third empire, which is the Greek Empire. So this is Isaiah chapter 13 and verse 17. It reads, Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb, and their eyes shall not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Let that sink in. How was Sodom and Gomorrah overthrown? Fire and brimstone. It was totally destroyed. This is another future prophecy for Babylon the Great, which is America. And one thing I do want to mention, these Medes, the Most High uses the Medes, their lineage goes back to Japhet. So these are Japhetic people. But through the course of history, starting with the Greeks, Esau, Edom began to conquer these other lands. The scriptures tell you they call their lands after their own names. Meaning, when they conquer these lands, they act like they're the original people of those lands. And the Medes, were around the Caucasus Mountains, the Black Sea, and other Japhetic people were in Greece, and other areas. Those isles. That's the Isle of the Gentiles. But the Most High uses the ancient people and names of the things that took place in ancient time to describe the nations in this present time that are going to be involved in this battle that's to come, which is the battle of Armageddon or Armageddon in the valley of Jehoshaphat or Yahweh Shaphat, Yahweh's judgment. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. Now, one more thing. Again, about this map, I told you Persia and the Carmenians. So let's go to 2nd Esdras. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 15. And we're going to start at verse 28. And then we're going to jump up and get a little bit more understanding. Because this is dealing with the end. This is an end time prophecy. Verse 28. Behold, an horrible vision, and the appearance thereof from the east, where the nations of the dragons of Arabia shall come out with many chariots. Your modern day chariots will be your tanks, your fighter jets, your aircrafts, your missiles, and the multitude of them shall be carried as the wind upon the earth, that all they which hear them may fear and tremble. Also the Carmenians, raging in wrath, shall go forth as the wild boars of the wood, and with great power shall they come and join battle with them, and shall waste a portion of the land of the Assyrians. Again, Babylon the Great, America, Babylon the Great is spiritual Egypt, is spiritual Assyria, is spiritual Babylon, is spiritual Greece, is spiritual Rome. It's all these spiritual places. It's a amalgamation of all these ancient kingdoms spiritually. Where we at? Verse 31. And then shall the dragons have the upper hand, remembering their nature. And if they shall turn themselves, conspiring together in great power to persecute them, then these shall be troubled, bled, and keep silent through their power, and shall flee. So I just wanted to get the point about the Carmenians. Also want to touch on, so let's jump up to verse 5, and it reads, Behold, saith the Lord, I will bring plagues upon the world, the sword, famine, death, and destruction. So this is the time that we're in, and it's going to get progressively worse. This is a worldwide thing that the Most High is making happen. Sword, that's all. That's killing. Whether it's localized with gang violence, or mass shootings like we just had, or whether it's war, famine. You're seeing the famines, food supply shortages, baby formula shortages, fertilizer shortages, and death and destruction. So this is a worldwide thing. Why? For wickedness hath exceedingly polluted the whole earth, and their hurtful works are fulfilled. So the Most High is getting ready to bring a lot of destruction and famine and death upon this world. And part of the end is World War III, in which the Most High is going to have the Carmenians, which are the Persians, which are the Iranians, and the rest of those Middle Eastern countries. He's going to raise them up. And who's going to be their protector? Gog and Magog, Russia, which would have been referred to as the Medes in ancient times. But who occupies that land right now? It's the Edomites. See, this is how all this ties in. There's some more in here, but for the sake of staying on track, I'm gonna end it right there as far as the Medo-Persian Empire. So let's go to Salakia. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 7, and we'll get into the third beast. So this is Daniel chapter 7, verse 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now this is going into the Greek Empire, and those 4 wings and those 4 heads represent the 4 generals that divided the empire of Alexander the Great, that being Ptolemy, Cassander, Seleucus, and Lysimachus. Now, from here, let's go to Daniel chapter 8, because it expounds upon that a little more. Well, it makes it plain. I don't want to say expounds a little more. It makes it clear. So this is Daniel chapter 8. I'm going to read a few verses at the top, and then we're going to jump down. So this is Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. So he said, I had another vision just like the other vision I had. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass, when I saw that I was at Shushan, in the palace which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. Now, before I read the next verse, let's just get this map right quick. And you see Media, you see Persia, and between them you see Elam, and that dot right above it is Shushan. So this is the area that Daniel was having a vision. All right, so let's just go back. Verse 3. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Again, that's going into the Medo-Persian Empire. This is what this ram represents, the Medo-Persian Empire as a whole, and those 2 horns represent them individually. The higher horn being that of the Persians. Again, remember, the Medes had dominion first. Verse 4. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward. Remember, westward would have been Babylon, northward would have been Lydia, southward would have been Egypt. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. So again, this is just describing just how powerful and just how great the Medo-Persian Empire was. These other nations couldn't do anything against it. Verse 5. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between the eyes. Now the goat as a whole represents the Greek Empire, and it said that it came from the west, Salakia, and he came from the west on the face of the whole earth. So this is describing the conquest of Alexander the Great, because if you know the history, he's accredited to conquering the whole known world during that time. And he touched not the ground. And the reason it's saying he touched not the ground is the same reason he's described as a leopard in Daniel chapter 7. It is describing the swiftness that he was able to conquer. So when it says he touched not the ground, it's like he took off running. He took off. His kingdom took off. Once he hit the ground, that was it. Once he came into power, once he started conquering, and that was it. That's the same representation of the leopard being swift. Also, that leopard does represent the fact that, the Most High uses clues. He prophesied these things well beforehand, and through history, we know that Alexander the Great used to wear a leopard. I can't think of the term. It wasn't like a hat, but he used to wear a leopard. So anyway, verse 5 again. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. So the goat itself is representing the Greek Empire. That notable horn being Alexander the Great, or Alexander the Greek. Verse 6. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran and ran unto him in the fury of his power. Let me scroll. Verse 7. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler, that's like deep hatred, against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Now, if you know the history, Alexander the Great physically stabbed Darius, the king of Persia at this time, stabbed him and considered himself the king of Persia. Verse 8, therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So at the height of the Greek Empire, this is when Alexander the Great died. I think he was about 32, and I think he reigned for about 12 years. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. Again, this is those four generals dividing amongst themselves the Greek Empire within those four directions, around that area, around that Levant area, around the area of the land of Israel. Same concept of encompassing that land. All right, so where we at? Verse 9. And one of them came forth, a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. Now, this is talking about Antiochus, and we're going to get that in the Maccabees. Now, I do want to jump down, because I might come back here. So let's jump down to 15. And it came to pass, when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the presence of a man. So this is an angel. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So the Most High was speaking to the angel I can't say it's the Most High. The angel Gabriel was given the command to go ahead and make Daniel understand what the vision meant. Verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall the Salakia, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep, and my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, behold, you scroll up. And he said, behold, I will make thee to know what shall be in the last end of indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So it's plain and simple. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. All right, I might as well get verse 22. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So these four generals, they're going to stand up, they're going to stand up in his stead, but not in the same power and authority and greatness that Alexander the Greek had. Now, let's go to Maccabees chapter 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, and Chittim is Italy, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. So this is going into how Alexander actually killed Darius, and again he stabbed him. Verse 2. And made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. And one point I want to make that I'm going to expound upon a little bit further, specifically dealing with the Greeks. Most of the countries, well, not most, the main purpose of taking over lands in the ancient time was to make other lands tributaries so they could pay taxes, so your kingdom would become greater and greater. Now, Alexander the Great was doing this. The thing that the Greeks brought about in the these Greeks, this was the beginning of Esau Edom coming on the world stage, and he's been on the world stage since this time, except for a brief period of time, but I'll get into that. But the difference between these Edomites, when they came on the scene, it wasn't just about making countries and nations tributaries and pay taxes. They were promoting their culture, whether it was their language, their customs, their religion. This is what they started putting on the people, and this is what's called Hellenization. But we'll get into that as we read on down. So verse 4 again. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. Verse 5. And after these he fell sick and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, this is his 4 generals, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years, then he died. So again, it was that 12-year period, which is a great accomplishment to conquer so much land in a short amount of time. And again, the Most High cut his time short, because who knows how far he would have gone. But anyway, and let's get 8 and 9. Actually 8, 9, and 10. So this is verse 8. And his servants bear rule, everyone in his place, and after his death they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied upon the earth. Now it's very important that the Most High, it's very important that you understand the Most High put this in here, because when these Edomites took on, came on the scene in a power and authority, this is when the evils started to increase in the world. Remember, the Most High made Esau Edom the wicked. They're the border of wickedness, and their blessing was the sword. So evils increase, wars increase when these Edomites came on the scene, and the Greeks were Edomites. Verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes. So that little horn that we read about in Daniel's chapter 8 that came out of those 4 horns is this horn. It's Antiochus Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been an hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Now I want to jump down to, this is going into how you had wicked Israelites making league with the heathen, specifically at this time the Greeks. But I want to jump down to about 41. So we're still in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, and this is 41. Because first of all, let's get Zechariah right quick. So this is Zechariah, and we're going to go back down to verse 18. So this is Zechariah chapter 1, verse 18. Then lifted I up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, 4 horns. And I said unto the angel that talked with me, what be these? And he answered me, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Now why did I want to read this? Because I want to keep the point in mind that these 4 nations, these 4 kingdoms had the most impact on us being scattered. Now how did the Greeks scatter us? Because they didn't necessarily take us into captivity. You know, we were made tributaries under them. They had to rule over us, but they scattered us spiritually and by keeping us from being able to keep our heritage. So that's the point I wanted you to keep in mind as we read Maccabees, First Maccabees 1 and 41. So this is First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 41. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. See, this is the same thing what these Edomites do today. They're always trying to make everybody else be like them, and they're the wicked. Verse 42, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. So all these other nations agreed, okay, well, we're going to just start following, the customs of the Greeks. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judea that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end that might forget, Salakia, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. See, that was the mental and spiritual scattering. Again, as I mentioned before, this goes into the whole controversy of neither Greek nor Jew. We weren't even allowed to, practice our laws, practice our customs. This is also where they started changing, the Hebrew alphabet and inserting vowels, your O's and your U's, and so forth and so on. But again, this is a furthering of that scattering. So let's go back to Daniel 8 just to show that small horn was Antiochus. So this is Daniel chapter 8, and we'll just start at verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. So that he-goat is the Greek Empire, and at its height, that great horn, being Alexander the Great, died. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great. That little horn is Antiochus, and the horn that it came out from, it says out of one of the four horns that little horn came from, that would have been out of the Seleucian dynasty. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. The pleasant land was the Holy Land, the land of Israel. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, those stars that were cast down, that was the Israelites. I'm going to come back to that when we deal with the fourth beast, because the fourth beast did the exact same thing. Well, not the exact same thing, but it's described in the same way. So let's go back to Daniel. This is Daniel chapter 7, and we'll read verse 6 on down to verse 7. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it four wings. That's the four directions. The beast had also four heads, and dominion was given to it. And again, that's those four generals. Verse 7. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. This is talking about the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire. And it's really not hard to follow or to understand what these 4 beasts represent. The lack of understanding comes in the fact that the Roman Empire fell in secular history, but people don't associate the time that we're living in right now as a continuation of this same dragon, this same beast, which is the reborn or revised Roman Empire. And it had 10 horns. Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. And those great things were great blasphemies. And this little horn is America. And those 3 horns that were plucked up represent the French, the Spanish, and the British, because America was formed through, the American Revolution, which took place against the British, the French-American War, and the Spanish-American War. These Americans are Edomites. These Americans are Europeans. Now let's go back to one of the maps that I showed in the beginning and get a little bit more understanding of these 10 horns. Again, so this is the map we saw of the Roman Empire and their control. Now you'll notice these smaller nations, not the Eastern Huns and not the Western Huns, but these other nations like the Burgundians or the Alemanni, the Anglo-Saxons. These are those 10 horns. These were considered vassal states. So they still had their own rule pretty much, but they were under the authority of the Roman Empire. And I think all of them are listed on here except one, which is the Hurili. So these 10 horns would be the Burgundians, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Alemanni, the Franks, the Visigoths, the Lombards, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Suebi. So these are those 2 horns. These are not 2 horns, but those 10 horns. These are the same nations that would eventually become the EU. So when we tell you that those 10 horns represent the EU, the European Union, this is what they represent. So those 10 horns on the dragon, Salakia, this is Daniel chapter 7. So the 10 horns that were mentioned here represents those nations, those vassal states that Rome had control over. Verse 7, and after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth, and devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Those are those 10 vassal states. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them a little horn. So this little horn represents America, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up. Through the course of history, the Roman Empire fell. You had the rebirth, which was the Renaissance. Then these European nations, they began to, develop their borders, so to speak, solidify their borders, and become the nations that you see today. Eventually traveling over here, mainly being the British, the Spanish, and the French, and conquering this land and pillaging this land. And ultimately out of those 3 nations, which were still Edomite nations, you had the birth of America. It's not like America was its own nation of people and then came over here. No, it came from those other nations, those other European nations. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I did want to mention. So when you see these nations, these are all Edomites, you know. And I think sometimes when you hear the word Edomite, you think it's just one group of people. Well, Edom had many sons, and I just want to show that right quick. This is Genesis chapter 36. Now I want to start at verse 16. Now verse 1, lists all the, the sons or whatever. But I want to start at verse 16 or verse 15 rather. And it says, these were the dukes of the sons of Esau. So the dukes were the chief sons, the sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn son of Esau, Duke Teman, which are the Germans, Duke Omar, Duke Zepho, Duke Kenaz, Duke Korah, Duke Gaddam, and Duke Amalek. And the Amalek is the people, the you-know-who's, you-know-where. The 1948 is in our land right now because they're the head tribe. They are the first of the nations. And it's no coincidence that these Europeans took on the titles of dukes. Now, I'm not saying that, in ancient times they were saying duke. Obviously, it would have been in the Hebrew, but it's just no coincidence. But just showing the point that Esau had many sons, just like Jacob had 12 sons, and we are called Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. We are called Israelites. Edom had many sons. They are Edomites. And through the process of time, they begin to, venture off into these northern regions, conquering them, renaming them, calling themselves after the people of that land. And so what you had during this time period, through the Roman Empire having these vassal states, it eventually became this. The beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. So that beast is a representation of the ancient Roman Empire, which was represented by the dragon having 10 horns. And you can't really see it all that good, but where it says 666, if you look beneath it, it lists the 10 countries that were initially a part of NATO. Not NATO, the EU, which was Belgium, Denmark, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Greece, Spain and Portugal, England and Ireland, and West Germany. And I always try to make sure I mention this. The beast with the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns mentioned in Revelation 17. It says 10 horns, but when we name these countries, we name off 12. But if you know the history, Ireland and England, they were under one king. The same thing with Portugal and Spain. And the scriptures tell you that these are 10 kings. Now, if you look to the left of that list, it goes into, the 10 horns. The 10 horns represent the common market of the European Economic Community, the EEC, established in 1958. Today, the EEC is known as the EU, the European Union. And what laid the foundation for the EU was something called the Treaty of Rome. And we'll go ahead and get that. The Treaty of Rome, or EEC, you get that? The Treaty of Rome, or EEC treaty, brought about the creation of the European Economic Community, the best known of the European communities. The treaty was signed on 25 March 1957 by Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany, and it came into force on 1 January 1958. Originally, the treaty establishing the European Economic Community, and now continuing under the name Treaty on Functioning of the European Union, it remains one of the two most important treaties in what is now the European Union. Again, I just wanted to show the fact that it was the Treaty of Rome. And what did Rome have to do with this treaty? It's the same spirit. The spirit of Rome was reincarnated into America, but the system itself is this beast system that is run by these Europeans. It's the same spirit. It's the spirit of Rome. All right, so let's go back to Daniel. Where we at? So this is Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to start back at verse 8. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. So great things. This is talking about America, Babylon the Great, speaking great things. You know, you can do what you want to do. You know, calling themselves or painting the image that they are the children of God. Painted themselves in the image of God. You know, it's just speaking great things and great blasphemies. Now from here, I want to go to Revelation chapter 13, because this is a point I wanted to make. So this is Revelation chapter 13 verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Now this beast represents this Edomite system, this Edomite European system. It is a geopolitical, military, economic system, but it's all of these European nations. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and his great authority. Now this beast, the way it's described using beast, just like Daniel used beast to describe the 4 kingdoms. But this beast is described in a way that depicts the history of these Edomites, starting with the leopard, because it was through Alexander the Great in the Greek Empire that Edomites came on the scene in authority. That's why it starts out as a leopard. Now it uses the feet of a bear, because the bear obviously represents Russia, which is Gog and Magog, but the bear was represented in Daniel chapter 7 as the Medes, the Medo-Persian, but more so the Medes, because the Medes had that land. It was Esau, Edom who conquered that land. So that land, whoever will be conquering that land in these times would be who these feet are representing or referring to. So that bear is representing the Edomites who are in that land right now, the land of Gog and Magog, which are still Edomites. The Russians are Edomites. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. So this is representing the beginning and the end. The beginning of it, because the foundation of it was a leopard, just like the Greeks. But the end of it is the feet, the bear, because Russia is going to be used to bring this kingdom to an end, along with those other nations in the Middle East that we read about in Ezra, not Ezra, but what is it? 2nd Ezra, chapter 15, and in Jeremiah 50. You know, all those nations. And his mouth was as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. We know this is not talking about those other nations, because the dragon came after the lion. The dragon came after the bear. The dragon came after the leopard. So the dragon could not have given them power. It's speaking about these Edomite nations coming back in power with the same spirit that was in the ancient Roman Empire. That's how they get that authority. And that mouth of a lion, that's really speaking of the British. When we read in Jeremiah 50 that your mother shall be sore confounded, who's the mother of America? It's Great Britain. And you got to understand the dynamics. It's the wicked elite who really control everything. It's the banking system, the world banking system, that's really in control. So these wicked elite banking families are the ones calling all the shots. That's why it's the mouth of the lion. And you can go through the history of, the British and their crests and their flags, going back to the lion. Verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Why did that deadly wound that was healed was the ancient Roman Empire. And it was dead for a period of time during the Dark Ages, during a 1,000-year period, but it was reborn. That's the spirit of Rome, of the ancient Roman Empire, was reborn during not during the Roman Empire, but during the Renaissance, and eventually came into full power into what you see today. So that's what this beast represents. This beast right here. It uses animals, just like in Daniel's vision, but these animals represent the history of Esau, Edom specifically, because through them the end will come. Let's get 2nd Ezra chapter 6. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 6 and verse 7. Then answered I and said, what shall be the parting asunder of the times? Or when shall be the end of the first and the beginning of it that followeth? So Ezra is asking the angel, how are we going to be able to tell the times? What's going to be the end of this current age that we're living in? And the age that we're living in right now is the age of Esau, Edom. This is his dominion. And what's going to be the beginning of the age that follows? What's the age that follows? The kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of Israel. Verse 8, and he answered unto me from Abraham, Salakia, and he answered unto me from Abraham unto Isaac, when Jacob and Esau were born of him, Jacob's hand held first the heel of Esau. So that happened, but it had a spiritual meaning behind it. And that spiritual meaning is about to play out now in our time. We're about to see the end of this man's kingdom, and we're about to see the beginning of our kingdom. Verse 9, for Esau is the end of the world. That's what the feet represent. And Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. That's what the feet represent. It represents the end. So Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, would be in power and would be in authority during the end. It will be his kingdom that comes to an end. This is back in Revelation chapter 13, verse 4. Actually, let me start at verse 3. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Now let's go back to the picture of the beast. So when it's speaking about these heads are the major Edomite powers that had rule on the earth up until this time. It was Germania Minor, Germania Major, Germania Minor, the Romans, the French, Spanish, the British, and the Greeks. When we go back to the other map, the lands today that we know as France, Spain, Germany, Great Britain, these are the same lands that were conquered by the Romans, that were up under their rule. It's just that now in our present time, these lands have been divided by lines or borders, and invisible lines, borders, and have been given different names. But it's through these people. Because, these, again, the Franks, the Burgundians, the Lombards, Ostrogoths, these were all Edomites. Now, I haven't I don't know specifically every single one of them, but most of them are Germanic tribes. Most of these names go back to those Germanic tribes. They just broke off, had different names, and settled in different areas. But they're all the same people at the end of the day. Now going back to Revelation chapter 13, let me start at verse 4. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. So when you follow the ways of America, Babylon the Great, and when you follow the ways of this world and this system, you are really worshiping the dragon. You're worshiping the ways of the ancient Roman pagan empire. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Because again, this is a geopolitical, economic, military powerhouse. They can get you in all ways. They get you with politics. They get you with economics, setting up sanctions. And they ultimately, they're able to get you with their military. Verse 5. And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Now, I'm not going to get into the 42 months, which is really 3.5 years, which is a prophetic 350 years, but that's a whole different lesson. Verse 6, and he opened his mouth and blasphemy against the Most High, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Now, I want to jump down, because this is the same beast that's going to bring about Revelations chapter 13, verse 16. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Now, I did jump down, and I don't want to be misleading or confusing. So this first beast is a representation of Esau Edom as a whole. It's two things. It's Esau Edom empires or kingdoms or nations through the course of history coming together to form what we have now as this beast system. Now when we scroll down to verse 11, it reads, and I beheld another beast come up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and spake as a dragon. This is speaking about America. This is specifically speaking about America, Babylon the Great, as the head that was healed, as the little horn that plucked up 3 horns before. And this one has 2 horns going into the political system, the right versus the left. And what does it read? What does it say? And I beheld another beast come up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, appearing as if he's here to help, appearing to be the leader of the free world, the poster child for democracy and liberty across the world. He had 2 horns like a lamb and spake as a dragon, because it's through his laws. And he doesn't just enforce his laws here in America, he enforces them throughout the world. Through sanctions, through alliances, either by gain, by helping a nation, become wealthy, or by force, through that military force, that military might. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him. And that first beast before him is talking about the dragon in Daniel chapter 7. That's the first beast before him, because it's the rebirth. America is the reincarnation of Rome, and this beast system is the spirit of the Roman Empire. And he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And that's when he dropped, what was it? Fat Boy and Little Man on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, along with the other wars where he's dropped missiles, maybe not, nuclear missiles, but that's the most prominent example of America, Babylon the Great, using their force on the world. But all these wars are examples of them dropping that fire down from heaven, because they bombed these other nations. Just take a look at what's been going on in the Middle East. So, I just wanted to make sure I get that. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 7. So this is Daniel chapter 7, and I'll start at verse 8. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things, speaking those great blasphemies. And I beheld, till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. Now he's seeing the image of the Most High, with a white garment and woolly hair, just like Jake, just like Judah. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. So this is speaking about the end. Matter of fact, let's get Revelations chapter 17. We'll get Revelation chapter 17, then we're going to get Revelation chapter 20. So this is Revelations chapter 20, Salaki chapter 17. And let's start at verse 8. The beast that thou sawest was. So this is John the Revelator having a vision, and the angel is explaining to him what the vision was. And he saw the whore sitting on top of this beast, and he's explaining what this vision means. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and yet, Salakia, and the beast that thou sawest was and is not. It was, this is the Roman Empire, and was not, because it was getting ready to be taken down. And when the Roman Empire fell, for a period of 1,000 years, that was the end, because the Most High put a seal on Esau, Edom, being able to extend their influence throughout the world. It's not that they just completely went away, but they couldn't extend their influence throughout the world like they were doing during the Greek Empire, transitioning into the Roman Empire. That they had a seal put on them, because this all the Most High's will. He was preserving them for the time that we're in now, that the scriptures might be fulfilled, that everything is written may be fulfilled. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. The bottomless pit is Europe. It's not some place in the middle of the earth. It's Europe. It's the bottomless pit. And go into perdition means destruction, because Babylon the Great is prophesied for destruction, as we read in Jeremiah and other places. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. So it was in power. It was in power during the time that John the Revelator was having these visions. After his time, the Roman Empire fell, but it came back into power, and the angel is explaining this to him. And it says all the people wondered whose names were not written in the book. So this beast is still around. Well, the beast that was mentioned in, well, we'll get to that. I don't want to jump the gun. So this is when the books are going to be open. Verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Mountains represent kingdoms. They represent nations. And the woman sits on this beast with these 7 heads. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. The 5 that fell will be the Germans, the French, the Spanish, Germania Minor, and Germania Major. Because when we saw the map, those are the lands that the Romans were able to conquer. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. I just named the 5 that are fallen. The one that is was the Roman Empire, because they were in power at that time, the time of this vision. And the other is not yet come. That's the British Empire. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is of the 8th. Now it's a parable, but it's not hard to understand if you got the spirit. It's all through the spirit. I can't act like I just know it. It's through the spirit. Of course I was taught, but once you taught and the spirit is dealing with you, you see it clearly. And the beast that was the Roman Empire and is not, because John is seeing a vision of it not being in power. Even he is the 8th. This is the woman that's sitting on the beast, which makes the 8th head, because it's the reincarnation of the Roman Empire. It really ain't even all that deep, man. The beast that was is the Roman Empire, and is not is the Roman Empire, and is and yet is the 8th. It's the Roman Empire being reborn in America. And Salah, you can read that again. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. So it's the same one. And is of the 7 and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings and receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So these have one mind to bring about this new world order and push that Qarabah that we just read in Revelations 13 and 16. And they've given their strength to the beast. They're giving their strength to this system. They're giving their military strength to this system. They're giving their aid to this system. They're giving their votes as far as political agendas to this system. These shall make war with the Lamb. See, it's these Edomite nations, these Europeans, these Edomites that are going to try to fight the Lamb. They're the ones going to try to fight the Savior when he returns. It's them. And the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. So something's going to happen. These nations are going to turn on America. That's why we read in Jeremiah 50, all ye that bend the bow. It said, set yourselves in array round about against Babylon. So all these nations are going to come against Babylon the Great, which is America, including her allies. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Why? For the Most High hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will. Remember, the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. And to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of the Most High shall be fulfilled. So he's putting it in their spirit to do that. So they're giving their power to this beast system because the Most High wants them to, so he can fulfill his will. Now, I did say I did say Revelation chapter 20, which I'm gonna get. So let's read this again. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. So when he's saying he beheld till the thrones were cast down, this is all kingdoms, all dominions. So it's not going to be no, there was a progression. Obviously the Babylonians are not in power right now. Obviously the Medo-Persians are not in power right now. Obviously the Greek Empire is not in power right now. But the Most High is taking down, when he sends back Yahushua and the angels, he's taking down all the kingdoms, all the remembrance of these kingdoms. It's not going to be any spiritual Babylon in any other nation. It's not going to be any spiritual Greece in any nation, or spiritual Assyria, or spiritual Egypt. All that shit's getting taken down. Salakia, verse 10. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Because the Most High is going to be in the spirit of those missiles. And, those chariots, they're going to, if these nations are going to try to make war with the Lamb, because the Lamb is not coming back here in a passive attitude. He's not going to be on just defense. No, he's going to be on offense. So they're going to be trying to make war. What do you think those chariots are going to be doing? They're going to be zapping these other nations, zapping the people with that concentrated fire, which is lasers. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him. Those are the angels. And 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. So the books going to be open. And you're going to be judged out of the things that are in the scriptures. But the judgment is set. It's already written. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Ancient Rome, Rome was burnt down. But the Roman Empire itself wasn't destroyed like that. And it's talking about the voice that the horn spake. That's America. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, and I beheld even till the beast was slain. So these horns are part of that same dragon. So it's the same Roman Empire. It's the same structure. And his body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And this is going into, once the kingdom of heaven is established on the earth, the other nations aren't going to be completely done away with. They're still going to be here, because they're going to be our captives, helping, or being what's the word? Being supervised over rebuilding the earth. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man come with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. This is Yahushua the Savior. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Now, before I read any further, as I mentioned before, I wanted to get Revelations chapter 20. So this is Revelation chapter 20, and let's start at verse 7. I didn't want to make this long, so I'm going to just start at verse 7. But when you read on up, it's talking about a seal being placed on, a great chain being placed on Satan, the serpent, and the devil, which is all synonymous with Esau Edom, because he is the serpent. The spirit of the serpent, which was a man in the Garden of Eden, is the same spirit that was reborn in Cain. It was the same spirit that was reborn in Esau Edom, the so-called white man that's running the world right now. And they are the devil. They are Satan. You know, devil means deceiver. Satan means adversary. Let me just read it right quick. I mean, it ain't that long. So this is Revelation chapter 20, verse 1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon. What was the dragon? That dragon is the same dragon that was in Daniel chapter 7. That's the dragon. And he's going to explain how he laid hold on him. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. So that was the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. Now, it started to fall a little bit before that, up until the time of the Renaissance during the 1400s, and cast him into the bottomless pit, which is Europe, and shut him up. So he couldn't extend his influence out on the world like he was doing during the Roman Empire and through the Greek Empire, and set a seal upon him. And it's just a dark cloud, kind of like the dark cloud that set over us, you know, us Israelites here in Babylon the Great. Because no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we protest, you just can't get ahead. You just can't get this devil's foot off of your neck, you know. And set a seal upon him that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season. Now that 1,000 years was fulfilled during the Dark Ages, and then you had the rebirth. So let's jump down to verse 7. And you know, to understand Revelations, as with other chapters in the Bible, you know, everything is not in sequential order. It's not in chronological order. It jumps. That's why the scriptures tell you here a little, there a little. But again, ultimately, the Spirit has to lead you. So this is verse 7. So we read Daniel 7 describing the other beasts. The fourth beast was diverse from the rest of the beasts. One, the main thing, it's a dragon. The other beasts are animals you can, or I don't want to say normal or natural, but yeah, they're normal, natural animals. I mean, it's a lion, it's a bear, it's a leopard, but this one is a dragon. All right, so verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison. That's Esau, Edom. And shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, that's Russia, and to gather them to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So since the time Esau, Edom has been let out of his prison, he went out deceiving the world, conquering lands, setting up lands, causing disputes within himself and other nations. And they went up. Well, let me jump. No, I'll just read verse 9. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city, and fire came down from the Most High out of heaven and devoured them. This is the same thing that Daniel saw. Let's go back to Daniel right quick. Verse 9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hairs of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. This is what we're reading. And fire came down from the Most High out of heaven and devoured them, all these nations. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. That lake of fire is Babylon the Great being utterly destroyed. So much so that it's going to appear like a lake of fire. That's the lake of fire. So the devil, the Esau, Edom, when this place is destroyed, that's the end. That's the end for him. That's the end for him and the other Edomite nations. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. And again, once America, Babylon the Great is destroyed, that beast system is destroyed, which would include, the false prophet, which is the Vatican, and all these other religions. That's all these kingdoms being taken down. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before the Most High, and the books were open. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, the scriptures. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every man according to their works. So, let me just read verse 14. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. So how is death and hell cast into the lake of fire? That's death for the Israelites who are going to be immortal, and hell for the Israelites who are never going to labor or be weary. This is the second death, the nuclear destruction. That's being described as being preserved for the dragon and the beast, which is the devil and the Satan and the serpent. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So same thing that we're reading here in Daniel chapter 7. So let me go back to Daniel chapter 7. And where did I stop at? Stopped at verse 14. So this is Daniel chapter 7 verse 14. And there was given him, this is speaking about Yahushua, dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, in his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. So he told me and made me to know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. And kings, it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific individual to be kingdoms. Mostly it's kingdoms. In this context, it is kingdoms. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, and this is the kingdom of the world. So these four beasts these great beasts, which are four great kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, this dragon, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns which were in his head. So this dragon had 10 horns. And of the other which came up before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And more stout means you're more puffed up. And America is more puffed up than his European counterparts. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. And they did, and they have prevailed against us for a period of time, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints shall possess the land. So wait a minute, this horn is going to prevail against the saints until the Most High intervenes. Up until the time the Most High intervenes and we get the kingdom, we don't get the kingdom until the end. Esau is the end of the world. Jacob is the beginning of it that follow it. We don't get the kingdom until these other nations destroy Babylon the Great. That's when death and hell is cast into the lake of fire, when this place goes down. So this dragon, somehow, some way, is going to still be in existence up until that time. Verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth. Those other nations didn't do that. They may have conquered the known world in their time, but it's in this time that we're living in, Babylon the Great. Now, this beast as a whole, because their influence is everywhere. And it's not just America's military. You got French military in different places of America. You know the history of Great Britain and different European nations that have militaries in different places. I'm not going to try to think or remember all of them. It's not that important, but you can go look into it. Thus he said, Salakia, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth. So the fourth kingdom that's going to be ruling is that dragon, that Roman Empire. But obviously the Roman Empire fell. That deadly wound was healed, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. They destroyed the whole world. They're destroying the earth. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. And another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. Now, this fourth beast is speaking about the revised Roman Empire, and those 10 kings is speaking about those European nations. And out of 3 of them is going to come about America, Babylon the Great, the little horn. Where we at? Verse 24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, saying there is no Most High, saying he can be God, saying he can be God through his AI technology, saying you can do whatever you want, saying the laws are done away with, saying the abominations that the Most High speaks against are okay. They're okay in his kingdom. Homosexuality is okay in his kingdom. And all manner of wickedness. We read in Maccabees chapter 1 that when these Edomites came to power, when they started to have rule, this is when evil started to be increased upon the earth. You've always had wickedness. You've always had wicked people. You got wicked Israelites. You got wicked people of other nations. But this is the wicked. And this is when wickedness started to be exceedingly great upon the earth. Verse 24 again, because verse 24 again. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them. And he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they wear us out. They wear us out. They wear us out spiritually. They wear us out mentally. All the things that you see around the world is meant to drain you spiritually and keep you at the bottom, and keep you from knowing who you are, keep you from coming back to your true power, Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. And they change times, they change laws. They have the power and authority to do that. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times, and the dividing of times. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Unto the end. So this fourth beast, which is the Roman Empire, has to still be here. And the kingdom and dominion and greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cognition much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Now, that was pretty much the end of it. I didn't want to make this too long, but I do want to. It's two more points I want to get. So when we read in Revelations chapter 20, Revelation chapter 20, I got a habit of putting S's on my words. That when he laid hold on that dragon, that's speaking about the Roman Empire, that old serpent which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. That's speaking about the Roman Empire being taken out of authority, and through the Roman Empire going down, all of Esau, Edom as a whole didn't have that influence to spread their wickedness throughout the earth as they were when they were in authority. But I want to go to Revelation chapter 12 verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. This represents that woman as a whole is the whole nation of Israel. Israel is likened unto a comely woman. Now you'll notice that the Most High likens these other nations to beasts, to various beasts, but the nation of Israel is likened unto a comely woman. And those 12 stars represent each individual tribe of Israel. Let's get that right quick. And this is Genesis chapter 37 verse 5. And I'm not trying to make this real long. I just want to hit this point right quick. Verse 5. Let's start at verse 4. And when his brother, this is speaking of Joseph and his brothers, because Jacob, he loved Joseph because Joseph was the youngest one. He just had a great affection for him. Verse 4. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. So they was hating on him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, I was binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to myself, Salaki, to my sheaf. And his brother said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dream and for his words. So he had a dream that his sheaf was standing upright while the other ones were bowing down to his sheaf. Verse 9. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. The sun and the moon represented his father and his son, and the 11 stars represented his brethren, him being the 12th star. Now, that sun and the moon for the whole nation of Israel really represents the wisdom and understanding through the law, statutes, and commandments. But I just wanted to get that point, that these stars represent the nation of Israel. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. That woman is the nation of Israel. The sun and the moon under our feet is our wisdom and understanding. That crown represents each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered, because we needed a savior. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. This is the same dragon that was spoken of in Daniel chapter 7. Because this is the Roman Empire. This is the same dragon that's spoken of in Revelation chapter 20. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them down to the earth. I wanted to read that so you understood. During the Assyrian captivity, the northern kingdom was taken captive. They were taken off, and all you had was the southern kingdom, which mainly comprised of the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Benjamin, and the tribe of Levi. Those are the 3 stars. So You did have some sprinkling of the other tribes that stayed with them, but predominantly the southern kingdom was comprised of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. These are the three stars. These are the third part of the stars that were that the tail of the dragon drew from heaven, and his tail drew the third part of the stars. So those stars represent Israel. This is no different than what the Greeks did. When we go back to Daniel chapter 8, verse 8, speaking of the little horn of Antiochus. This is verse 9, but let's start at verse 8. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones from the 4 winds of heaven, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. That little horn is Antiochus. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Those are the Israelites. So those stars represent Israel. So we're going back to Revelation chapter 12. It's the same thing that the Romans did. They drew a third part of the stars, because during the time of the Romans, the Israelites who knew they were Israelites, they were dwelling in Jerusalem. Those were of the 3 tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. During the time of the Babylonians, when they conquered us and took us into captivity, the kingdom was the kingdom of Judah. And they just called all of us Jews. That's how Jews came about. They weren't going through the extra steps to I can't say the word, to distinguish the different tribes. I was trying to say differentiate, but it's not going to come out. But they weren't going through all that hassle of trying to distinguish the different tribes. They just called them Jews because they were all from the kingdom of Judah. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered. That dragon is the Roman Empire. And this is speaking about Yahushua being delivered. Because remember, Herod sent the wise man to see, where the Savior was going to be born, where he's going to be born at, so he can have him killed, basically. To devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, just like we read in Daniel 7. And her child was caught up unto the Most High to his throne, just like we read in Daniel 7. This 4th beast will be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. It's the dragon. It has been reborn in this time. Now, it's more I want to get in here, but it's been long enough. I think the point was made, and really I just wanted to go through the chapter or the book of Daniel chapter 7, and just relate the history through prophecy and what times we're in right now. But again, I ain't gonna make it too much longer. Hopefully the lesson was edifying. I'm gonna say all praise Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua, Bahashem Rakakwadash, for putting the spirit on me to do the lesson. And until next time, Shalom.